Carlyn with the Texas Historical Commission. Welcome to another episode in our Training for Texas Museum series. It's a project that's partially funded through a generous grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Today's topic is photograph storage, and we've actually got so much to talk about that we're going to break this episode into 3 different parts. This is part 1, and we'll talk about, we'll give an overview of photo storage and discuss the different paper enclosures that you can use. Part 2, we'll talk about plastic enclosures, and in part 3, we'll talk about whether or not you should store your photos vertically or horizontally. So I do get a lot of questions about storing photographs. There's so many different options available that it's really easy to get overwhelmed or confused. People ask, do we use sleeves? Do we use envelopes, paper or plastic? Do we store them horizontally? Do we store them vertically? Which is the right option? There are advantages and disadvantages to all of those options, and we're going to discuss those today. Before we get started, though, we need to talk a little bit about terminology and some of the terms that you're likely to come across when you're shopping for your storage supplies. In particular, I want to talk about the terms acid-free and archival. You need to be really careful here, because just because those terms appear in the product description, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe for use with your museum photographs, with your photograph collection. The term archival actually is unregulated. Anyone can put that on their product packaging. It doesn't have to meet any particular standards for them to use the term archival. And just because something is free of acid, that doesn't mean that it's free of all other harmful chemicals or substances. So even though a product might say that it's acid-free and that it's archival, it doesn't guarantee safety when it comes to your museum storing its photograph collections. What you do want to look for are products that are not only acid-free, but also lignin-free and chemically inert, meaning that they're chemically stable. You can look for enclosures that meet the ISO standards for photo enclosures, and ISO is the International Organization for Standardization. You want to look for those materials that meet ISO standard 18902. You also want to look for materials that have passed the Photographic Activity Test, sometimes known as the PAT test. You look for those 2 things and you'll be good to go. Now, it's important to remember that just because a product started its life as acid-free doesn't mean that it's going to stay acid-free forever. Even the best quality acid-free storage materials, particularly your paper ones, will become acidic at some point in time. So it's really important that you have a way to test the acidity. You can use something as inexpensive as this pH pen. You make a mark, and depending on the color that it turns, it tells you the level of pH of those materials. And so it's important to have a regular schedule for checking those things out. Now, it's also important that you realize that there's no one right way to do any of these things that we're going to talk about today. Photograph storage is dependent on many different factors. The types of photographs that you have, the condition that they're in, the number of photographs that you have in your collection. Though the answers to those things might mean doing it one way makes more sense for you than doing it in another way. You also have to think about the resources that you have available to you, your budget, the number of people that you have to work on the project, the amount of time that you have to put towards that project. All of those things will help you determine which storage method and the storage products are best suited for your use. Now, the materials and the processes that they've used to create photographs over time have changed dramatically. So what's good for one type of photograph might not necessarily be good for another type of photograph. And so you need to take some time to identify the kinds of photos that you have in your collection. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to that perpetual debate, paper or plastic. A lot of you have probably gotten really comfortable in the grocery store by answering neither to that question. But when it comes to storing your photographs, both of them are still really good options. We'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each one first. Let's talk about paper first. Paper has some really good advantages. First of all, it's opaque, meaning that it will protect the image inside from things like the light. It's also porous, which allows it to release any harmful vapors, any harmful gases that might happen to be inside of there. It's easy to write on, a lot easier to write on paper than it is on plastic, and it's also much less expensive. Paper is definitely going to be your more economical choice. Now, it does have some disadvantages. One of them is it's hard to see what's inside. And that's really important if the collection that you're housing is a high access collection, meaning that you need to use it for research or some other purposes. If that's true, you're going to have to take that photograph in and out of its enclosure who knows how many times. And every time you do that, you put the photograph at risk by handling it like that. Now, that may not be a big deal if the photograph you're housing, or the collection that you're housing, if it's a low-use kind of collection. In other words, it doesn't really have a high research value. People aren't going to need access to the originals ever, or very often. Or if you've already duplicated those photographs in some way, either print copies or electronic digitized copies. If that's already happened, then maybe you don't need to have access to these photographs very often, and putting them in the paper is actually just fine. So paper enclosures actually come in a couple of different formats. You can get paper envelopes or you can get paper folders. We're going to talk about envelopes first, and they actually come in two formats. Envelopes do. You can get them with seams or you can get them with no seams. We'll talk about the ones with seams first. You can see this is just a traditional envelope. It is closed on 3 sides, open on the 4th side, and it's put together with these seams. Now, the deal with this is that the seams are put together with an adhesive. Now, you want to look for the kind that is non-acidic. In other words, the adhesive itself is non-acidic, and it also needs to be non-reactive with silver. That's really important for some of your photograph collections. Now, this one, of course, has the flap. The image is, of course, on the inside. You put it in and close the flap, and it's protected in that way. But envelopes come in some other varieties as well, and that looks like this. They're still closed on 3 sides. You still see the seams, but they don't have the flap on top. Now, this allows for a little better access, a little easier access to the image that's inside. This one, as you can see, actually has a thumb cut. And I'm showing you this one as an example of the type that you don't want to get. And here's why. This little thumb cut is just begging for people to grab the photograph that you can see through the thumb cut and pull it out. And as you can probably tell, that puts the photograph inside at a much greater risk for damage. By pulling on it like that, any number of things can happen to that photograph. So you don't want the kind with the thumb cut. You want the kind that has the straight edge. And you'll insert your photograph there. Now, in order to get this photograph out, you have to very gently squeeze the sides and kind of tap it until the photograph comes out. That gives you a lot lower risk of damaging that photograph as you're extracting it. Now, another thing that you'll notice is I'm putting the photograph into these envelopes with the emulsion side or the image side on the side of the envelope that doesn't have the seams. See, here's the seams. You want the back of the photograph against the seams side. And that's just in case the adhesive fails in some way. The adhesive will get onto the back of your photograph rather than the front of your photograph. And the chances of a conservator being able to rescue that photo is a lot greater that way. All right. So we also have a second kind of envelope, and that's the seamless envelope. And some of you may know this better as a 3-flap enclosure or a 4-flap enclosure. They're called, different things. The folder or the envelope works by opening up each one of the flaps and revealing the photograph inside. This gives you protection on all four sides, but it gives you the added benefit of pretty much forcing the user to lay the photograph flat on the table in order to access it. And again, that gives you a better chance of not damaging the photograph when you're taking it out of its enclosure. This kind of storage method is really appropriate for things that are really fragile or images that you want to store with its mat or with its backing of some kind. It's also really, really good for glass slide negatives. And these enclosures come in all sizes, and you can make your own as well. Now, the final type of paper enclosure is a folder. And this is actually the most economical of all of these options. A folder is just what you think it is. It's closed on one edge. The photograph just goes right inside. It's very easy to put the photograph in. It's very easy to get the photograph out. You leave a little lip up here so that you can write, making identification really easy. You can make your own with that acid-free, lignin-free paper, which is a really economical way to go about doing it. Or you can purchase the pre-made folders, and you have your image inside. You have your image inside here. Now, with both of these folder options, because they're open on three sides, it's important that you get the size folder that fits perfectly inside the box so that it's not shaking around in there and allowing that photograph to fall out. You also want to make sure that you give it nice support. This paper folder is rather thin, and when we put it in the box, if we're not careful to support it, it can slump down and sort of get curved like this, which of course would be damaging to that photograph. So you want to get either some good quality mat board, and every so often in the box, give it a little bit of support, and make sure that you're filling the box completely. Not overfilling it, but filling it as completely as you can. So I think that's a really good overview of our paper objects, and that's a good place to stop for this particular part of our episode. Tune in to part 2, and we'll talk about plastic enclosures.